All right, we will go ahead and begin. I want to begin by saying welcome to the first meeting of the Kentucky Unemployment Insurance Reform Task Force. Co-Chair Nemes and I appreciate you either being here in person or participating remotely. This task force has been tasked with the following: review the current unemployment insurance system, evaluate and discuss possible long-term changes to the unemployment insurance system that would address the fiscal well-being and stability of the system, solicit recommendations from stakeholders and interested parties, and develop a list of recommendations for the General Assembly to consider related to reform of the unemployment insurance system. We will meet several times over the interim and are required to submit any findings and recommendations to the Legislative Research Commission by December 2nd, 2021. I'm going to ask Sasha to call the roll. I ask each member when answering the roll to indicate in their response whether they are here in the room or here remotely. Legislative members, if you are remote, please let us know if you are in your annex office or participating from your district. Sasha, please call the roll.
Senator Alvarado.
I'm here remotely, but en route. I should be there in a matter of moments.
Thank you. Senator Storm.
Participating remotely out of my district.
Thank you. Senator Wilson.
Here in the room.
Senator Yates.
I'm sorry, I was still muted. Present remotely from district.
Thank you. Representative Branscombe.
Remotely out of district.
Representative Cantrell. Representative Pratt.
Here in the committee room.
Representative Sharp.
Here in the committee room.
Co-Chair Nemes.
Present in the room.
Co-Chair Weber.
Present in the room. For those of you participating remotely, our committee staff is monitoring the chat function in the Zoom application. Please indicate in the chat box if you have a question or want to make a comment. If you are speaking remotely, please keep your microphone muted until you are going to speak. Co-Chair Nemes, anything that you would like to say before we begin our presenters?
Yes, thank you, Chairman Russell Weber. I'm sorry. We're here for a very important issue, but we're not here to find blame. We are here to find what's going on and what we can do for the future for the benefit of the people of Kentucky. This is a very personal and emotional issue, so we want to try to keep it as professional as we can so we can do the best for Kentucky. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Nemes. We're now going to begin with the agenda portion of our meeting. Our first item that we will discuss today will be unemployment insurance fraud. I'd like to ask George McFarland and Kate Shanks to come forward. I believe Courtney Metter is participating remotely. Okay. All right, and then after they are finished with their presentation, we will have Secretary Roberts, Director Hoskinson, and Director Eves come forward, and I think we might have some questions from our presenters as well as members of the committee on that. I'm going to ask each of the three of you to introduce yourselves for the record, and after you've done so, Kate, you can go ahead and begin your presentation. Can you turn your mic on if it's not, Kate?
George and Courtney, if you'd like to introduce yourself for the record.
Sure. My name is George McFarland. I am a co-owner of UCCS. We are a unemployment compensation consulting firm that deals with unemployment compensation taxes and dealing with issues as it pertains to servicing clients to lower the cost of their unemployment costs through reducing their experience rating and helping them to control their unemployment costs through unemployment hearings and consultations on how should I put this, on how to discharge individuals properly so that they are not defrauded in the unemployment compensation system.
Courtney, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, I'm Courtney Metter. I'm the HR director with Houchins Food Group. We have partnered with George McFarland and his team for many, many years, and they handle all aspects of our unemployment claims. And so I've asked him to speak on our behalf today, as he's truly the one that has experienced the brunt of the unemployment claims and the fraud for our company.
Thank you. And thank you, Chairman. And again, I'm Kate Shanks, Vice President of Public Affairs for the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce. I know my mic wasn't on, so for those that are virtually participating, but thank you for allowing us to speak on this really important topic. I am no stranger to unemployment insurance. I know you all have heard from me often. You heard from me throughout session on this topic. Dealing with the challenges of unemployment insurance as they affect businesses was one of our top agenda items for the 2021 session, and I have to start by thanking you all for really tackling this issue head on. The funds that you appropriated to help us pay off our federal loan, that was huge for us. That helps us avoid federal interest and penalties, and it helps us start to dig out of the $1.2 billion hole that was created during the pandemic. Of course, Chairman, House Bill 413, that legislation was important in recognizing the UI tax, the unemployment insurance tax that would have hit employers this year, putting a freeze on that as we continue to work through these policies. And then we also supported Senate Bill 7, which Senator Givens brought forward, that dealt with the waiver of callback funds, as well as starting to tackle fraud. And that's what we're here to talk about with you all today. This is a very important issue for the business community, and unfortunately, we are continuing to get hit with fraudulent claims. I was passing by my CFO last week, and he was on the phone reporting to our HR director that we had gotten another fraudulent claim. So this is affecting all of us, I think. I think if you talk to most businesses, they will tell you that they've had hits. In this particular situation, I think benefits had actually been paid out. We hadn't had a chance to appeal. And so there were clearly some challenges that we were dealing with, and it wasn't the first one. And I think that really reflects what businesses as a whole are experiencing. I will say that this is not a Kentucky-specific problem, nor is it a pandemic-specific problem. And actually, in the first 12 months of the pandemic, the U.S. Department of Labor estimated that at least $63 billion was paid out in improper and fraudulent claims. And this is more than double about $30 billion paid out in 2019, so before the pandemic hit. So this is a problem that we have been dealing with in the system, and this is a problem that is not specific to Kentucky. It's nationwide. We do hope that the problem is getting better and is resolving. I know that Cabinet has put some protocols in place, and hopefully we're seeing the fraudulent claims on the decline. But we want to just make sure that employers are doing all they can to properly report the claims. And we believe this to be the case. Their experience rating isn't impacted by these fraudulent claims, and that they're taking all the steps they need to take to make sure they're notifying the Cabinet and doing whatever is expected of them to protect themselves. We also want to better understand that when a claim is paid out, how does that impact the trust fund? Does it impact the trust fund balance? And where do those funds come from? Of course, I'll go ahead and point out, typically it is just employers that pay into the unemployment insurance trust fund. I know this last year we got federal money to pay down the loan, but in a typical environment, in a typical situation, it is just employers that are paying in. So if claims are being paid out fraudulently, then it's easy for me to get to the point that employers are paying those. That's coming out of their pockets ultimately, is what our understanding is. And then also, I do want to point out too that this is something that we've been working on for a while. We supported legislation a couple of years ago to start the process of replacing what is our unemployment insurance system. I guess portal is the right way to describe it. We supported a bill that would actually siphon off a little bit of the UI tax funds that employers are paying in to redesign and rebuild the actual system, because we recognize that there were some shortcomings. And we know that in addition to individuals that are using the system to make claims, employers are in there as well. But there's not a lot of information employers can get from the system. There's not a lot of ways for them to interact. And I know George can speak more to these details if you're interested, but just how you go about reporting a fraudulent claim. Is there any way to actually flag a claim quickly that's been, that is a fraudulent or potentially fraudulent claim? The appeals process. So there's a lot of just different layers of the system that we have been sort of peeling back to figure out how we can make improvements, not only for the claimant, but the employer's perspective that's utilizing the system as well. So we are eager, and Co-Chairman Nemes, I appreciate your comments. We agree that we want to roll up our sleeves and figure out how we can get to some solutions. We are happy to help in any way that we can, this task force, as well as how we redesign and reinstate a new unemployment insurance system. We want to be as helpful as possible because we know this is an important issue for the business community going forward. And, these fraudulent claims, they have to stop, and we have to find ways to stop, and we want to be a partner in that. But I did want to bring with me a couple of experts that can talk more specifically about their experiences. I know that that's valuable for these task forces. So with me today are my colleagues from Houchins. They've introduced themselves. Courtney Metter is the HR director with Houchins Food Group, and George McFarland, who works closely on UI for the Houchins Group. And George is going to talk a little bit about their specific experience with these claims. And so, Chairman, if it's okay with you, I'd like to turn it over to George to go ahead and provide some comments as well.
Mr. McFarland, you may begin.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank Courtney for the opportunity that she has given me to present this information to you. And I also like to thank the UI Reform Task Force for the platform to be able to voice some of the concerns and issues and experiences that we've had since the beginning of the pandemic and even before the pandemic on how we've tried to deal with some of the problems and how to remedy some of those problems. I want to commend the cabinet and its workers for the hard work that they have put in trying to make sure that not only are the claimants being served, but the employers are at the same time that their needs are being addressed. And I think it's a tough task for all of us as we've dealt with the pandemic to try to work through some of the difficulties that we've had over the last year and a half. I have been working in unemployment compensation since I left college. I left college in 19, well, I don't tell how old I am, but I left college a long time ago. And I have not had an experience that we've had over the last year and a half with unemployment compensation. Since then, when I left college, we had a high unemployment rate at that time. And I worked for the state of Illinois, and we had the commissioner from the state come in to our central office downtown Chicago. And this is what he said to us in trying to deal with the excess of unemployment compensation that we were dealing with. And he simply said, pay everybody. Well, that is how I felt during this recent pandemic. We have had an onslaught of unemployment claims like I have never seen. Under normal circumstances, we may have, with the number of companies that we represent, we may have 30 to 40 unemployment claims during the course of a day. However, during this recent pandemic, we were receiving as many as 400 to 500 unemployment claims a day. It was overwhelming. I mean, there was simply nothing we could do. We did the best we possibly could. And a large number of those unemployment claims that we were getting in were fraudulent claims. Now, the state of Kentucky, and I want to commend them again for what they've done. They have provided us a link for a number of unemployment claims that we believe were fraudulent claims. And we have used that tremendously to take advantage of some of the overwhelming claims that we've received. However, there have been ongoing issues with that because, as you know, this experience, or it affects our experience rating system, and we have great concern over that. However, there are a number of things that I think we can do. And again, I commend the chairman for pointing out that we're not here to point the finger at anyone or blame anyone. But I think there are a number of things that we can do in order to try to remedy some of these problems. And I'm hoping that as a result of our meeting today, we can put our heads together or suggest ideas that would help us to be able to solve some of these problems. Now, I have a couple of things here that I want to bring out. One of them, one of the problems that we're having as far as the fraudulent claims are concerned, is not only are we asked to provide separation information on many of the claims that have come in, but we're asked to provide timely separation on these fraudulent claims. And it has created a hardship, not only for the customers that we serve at Houchins and other companies, but it has created a hardship on our staff. We simply, as a result of the pandemic, were simply unprepared for what we encountered. I mean, I don't have any other way to put it other than we were simply overwhelmed, and we were untimely and were not able to provide timely separation information. The time that it takes to process an unemployment claim is longer than one person might even imagine. Not only are we to provide detailed separation information, but again, that separation information must be provided in a timely fashion. And that has been a real challenge for us. Now, one of the things that is going on with many of these unemployment claims, especially these fraudulent claims, is what we call phishing emails or email scams. These are situations where a common unemployment insurance scam involves phishing emails, and it's designed to look like a reputable claim. They are wrong. They are simply trying to find or get information from individuals so that they can use that to gain monetary advantage of them. That is a problem. I wish we could look closely on how to deal with that. There's debit and direct deposit scams that people use to provide direct information on their debit cards or their credit cards. There are fake call scams, there are job seeker scams. There are many scams that are going on out there that we simply are not ready to deal with. And again, I don't want to point the finger at anyone, but I think it would be fair to say, and if I'm wrong, I stand accused, but I think it would be fair to say that our current unemployment system is outdated. It needs to be updated. And there are a number of things that we can do to make sure that this type of situation doesn't occur in the future. What I hope we are able to address here in the next few meetings is how, or the most effective way to update our system so that the scammers and the fraudulent claimers will not be able to take advantage of the system and other people who are trying to receive unemployment in a legitimate fashion. Thank you so much for allowing me to present that, and I turn it back over to our leader.
Go ahead, Kate.
Thank you, George. And I'll just comment that, the speed with which you all need to respond to these claims, the number of claims that you have to respond to, and also something I think that is important that you brought up about if we can all agree that we need to make improvements to the system, how quickly can we do that? I think there's probably some logistical challenges in actually designing and implementing the system. I'm looking forward to hearing from the cabinet on that, but how quickly can we do that? And are there any additional safeguards we can put in place until then? Ultimately, I think the goal is for Kentucky to be known as a state with a really tough system to hack or to take advantage of. And, if this is such a big problem nationally, you have to expect that there's all sorts of folks out there that are taking advantage. It's probably organized in some way to do that, and it would be the best scenario for us to have a system that's just really concrete and very difficult to manipulate. So that's what we're interested in participating in and learning more about, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you all might have.
Mr. McFarland, I have one question initially. I want to start with just to get some clarification from you. You commented earlier about the time that is required to respond to an unemployment claim on the business side. Can you give us just a general rundown as to how much time that requires and what is involved in responding to a request that comes to you?
Sure, I'll be glad to. Generally speaking, we have in the state of Kentucky, for example, 10 days to respond by mail, 12 days to respond electronically. During that period, when a claimant files a claim, they will file the claim online or through their unemployment office, local unemployment office. And that claim, and let me step back for just a moment. And again, this is, I don't want to sound like I'm griping, but some of you may or may not know that we've had an issue ongoing with our postal system for the last year as well. We are getting claims that are due on the day in which we received the claim. And that's not fair to us because we don't have ample time in order to respond to those claims, whether they be manually or electronically. And because of the ongoing postal system that is having its issues as well, when we receive an unemployment claim, we have to provide separation information on that claimant who has filed the claim. That requires that we get information from our from many of our workers. For example, in the state of Kentucky, and how Houchins works it, is that we have payroll clerks in which we receive information from each employee that has separated from the company will receive a final notice of separation. On that final notice of separation, there is information as to why that person has separated from the company. That process can take a day or 2 days, but when that information is provided to us, then there is a form that we have to fill out for the state that requires us to provide detailed information. If it is a last employer, not a base period employer, then we have to provide detailed information. That detailed information can take up to an hour, sometimes 2 hours to gain all the information that we need in order for the examiner to properly adjudicate the claim. After we provide that information back to the employer, then they in turn will adjudicate the claim and provide a determination as to whether or not that claimant is going to be eligible for benefits. Now, under normal circumstances, it might take 3 to 4 or 5 days, depending on the amount of information that is needed in order to adjudicate the claim. However, during the process or during the pandemic, we simply didn't have time to do them. We were receiving claims late, as I indicated before, and then we were providing that information back to the state agency as quickly as we can. As a result of that, determinations were going out, and because we were not receiving it properly, determinations were going out in which individuals were paid unemployment compensation who should not have been paid benefits. And as a result of that, we've had to go through a hearing process. That hearing process is another long encounter where we have to meet with the claimant, meet with a hearing officer, and one of us will represent our employer. We have to provide witnesses for the employer, and that is a 2, 3, 4 week process. So it is another area where is a lot of lag is going on, and we have to try to provide as much information as we possibly can. To answer your question directly, under normal circumstances, it might take 6 or 7 days in order to properly provide separation information back to the state agency. But as a result of the postal system being the way it is, that information is taking more than 10 days or 2 weeks. And we're having to deal with the ramifications of providing late separation information. Now, the state of Kentucky has been helpful in that they have given us a little extra time, but in many cases, they have gone ahead and paid the individual who should not have been paid, and then that creates another whole set of problems.
Thank you, Mr. McFarland, for that explanation. Representative Cantrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. thank you, Mr. McFarland, for providing your perspective on this. What I'm hearing from you, and I think this is going to come out more and more as we delve into this topic, is this is a two-way street with the business community and get the government's administration of unemployment insurance claims. And it reminded me of a conversation we had a couple weeks ago on another committee I'm on about security systems, about that phishing emails and scams are what's leading to a lot of this fraud. And so my question is, you know, you have a lot of high-profile announcements about businesses that have let go of a lot of workers, and then they become targets for a lot of fraud because it seems like some of these scammers and some of these criminals out there who are infiltrating systems will try to make it look legitimate and make it look like they were once employees of this company that announced that they are furloughing workers. So my question is, you know, we're all doing the best we can with this. You have people working from home. You have people working on your own devices. What is the business community doing systems-wise to be sure that they do not become targets of fraud? What kind of internal systems are you putting into place to be sure that you do not become a target of a fraudulent claim?
Do you want me to tackle that, Representative?
If you can,
yeah.
Certainly.
Yeah, and I think that's a great question. And we get, and I can speak for the Chamber of Commerce as an organization, we get constant education and updates from our IT director, and are very careful about those phishing scams. But they get through. And we hear about it in some of these even high-profile cases where there are attacks on business. And so I think that is a bigger, broader conversation. Perhaps Chairman Pratt and your committee, that's something we can talk about as well. But, I mean, it's definitely a concern. I would say, though, in the cases that we've had at the Chamber where we suddenly get these letters that benefits have been paid out, I mean, I can't trace that to a phishing scam specifically. I mean, I think that these fraudsters are probably pretty sophisticated in how they're going about and getting it. I've had CEOs of major corporations get these, and clearly you can see the CEO is still employed there. I mean, it's not necessarily a entry-level employee that, isn't on the internet or isn't on the website. Sometimes it's these high-profile positions. So I don't know enough about how they're getting in to figure out how to solve it from a cyber attack. But at the Chamber, we do have policy, we do have programming and training for businesses on that because it is a much broader, bigger issue that we have to worry about. So that's an important point.
Senator Alvarado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for your presentations. Are you aware of any, maybe this goes for Mr. McFarland as well, and any data breaches that you've all had within your organization that may have caused this, or are you guys aware of any that you've had with any of your members of the Chamber that have had throughout the state?
George, are you familiar? I'm not familiar with any specific data breaches related to the issue. I don't know, George, if you've had clients specifically with those challenges that you want to speak to.
We have not. I know the state agencies, the unemployment agencies, have gone through the process in the last year. For example, in the state of Georgia, in the state of Kentucky, in the state of Colorado, Missouri, in which we have businesses. They have gone through the process of providing or cutting down as much information as they can. For example, they used to provide an entire Social Security number. Now they provide only the last 4 digits, and that has helped with some of it. However, it has not solved all of the problem. So no, but I am not aware of any data breaches that any of the companies have had.
Also, I guess a follow-up to that, you mentioned about having 400 to 500 claims you were having to deal with on a daily basis. Roughly how many extra people could you have used on a given day to help process those claims? If you would, would it have been, if you would have had, you're probably going to say any amount of people, but let's say if you would have had 20, 50, 100 people, could you have kept up with that kind of volume?
To address the number of claims that we were getting on a daily basis in order to properly process those claims on a timely basis, we needed at least, I would say, 40 people.
Thank
And
you.
we simply don't have that staff.
Sure, I understand.
We have a staff of 9.
And the reason I asked about the data breaches, I know we had 2 within state government during this process. One that was unreported for 5 weeks. I'm self-employed, and I'm very careful about my data. Nothing has gone out. I've had no data breaches at home yet. I got a fraudulent letter, Mr. Chairman. Someone had applied under my name. The only way that would have gotten out would have been through probably a data breach within our own state government, which is where I got the claim applied through. So that becomes my concern, is in terms of having good IT people on the ground, making sure we can keep our systems up to protect against that. Because I suspect a lot of the fraudulent claims, particularly here in state government from state employees, came out of data breaches that we had within state government, some of which went unreported for weeks. And I know that, I'm sure the business community is aware, if you have a data breach, you're required by state law to report that within 3 days. When we have that kind of a delay, that becomes a concern. So we often have laws on the books to assist people already with that process. It's just a matter of following those laws, I think, is important. And also, I know we've had an opportunity, and I'll be curious to hear from the cabinet here in a few moments in terms of having the kind of personnel and assistance with that to be able to process those claims. I appreciate that in private business, but thank you all for that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Pratt.
Actually, Representative Senator Alvarado stole some of my thunder there. I don't think it's on the business community side. I think it's at the state level, because again, we had those security breaches. I hope Mr. Roberts addressed that when he speaks to us, because I don't think we've got employees that got fraudulent letters and got claims filed against them, and I guarantee you we did not get hacked. So I think it's on the state level. Hopefully he'll address that when he tells us about this, but again, I think those were a lot farther, a lot deeper in what they let us believe. So I'd love to hear him discuss that when he comes forward. Thank you.
Any other questions from members of the committee? All right, at this time, I would like I saw Secretary Roberts earlier. Oh, we've got this large pole here stopping me from seeing you. Secretary Roberts, if you want to come forward, Director Hoskinson and Director Eves, Legislative Director, if you all will come forward. Mr. Secretary, I think this may be your last appearance before...
Yes, Chairman Weber, I think this may be my last opportunity and your last opportunity to ask some questions, and we'll try our best to answer all the questions you do have. I am Secretary Roberts.
I am Buddy Hoskinson. I'm the Executive Director for Unemployment Insurance and also the Commission for Unemployment Insurance.
And I'm Morgan Eves. I'm the Legislative Director for the Labor Cabinet.
Very good. So I think we may have some questions here. I have several myself. So let me begin. I'll just, as I wrote them down, I'll share some, and then we can talk about those. And if other members have, please flag Sasha that you'd like to speak. So the first question I have is, when a fraudulent claim is paid out, benefits have been paid out, is the employer account charged for that? What's the process for clearing that up?
For calendar year 20 and calendar year 21, reserve accounts are not charged for any particular benefits that are paid out. That's due to 2 different things that occurred. Governor Beshear issued an executive order that protected those accounts during the calendar year 2020. House Bill 413, Chairman Weber, that you sponsored, also provided that protection that there's nothing being charged to employers, whether it's a fraudulent account or whether it's a legitimate. That comes out of the pooled accounts. So an employer is not going to have a negative impact by virtue of either one of those circumstances.
Very good. Thank you for that clarification. I just wanted to get that out there in the discussion. So one of the issues that surfaced when Mr. McFarland was speaking, and I think if we did a poll of this room, we'd all agree that we've experienced problems with the U.S. mail. Can you give me the breakdown of the process that you have when these letters go out to businesses or to employees or folks that have claims that have been filed? What's your mail process, and are you working on any remedy to help with the time frame? How do we solve the
If
time
I
frame?
can, let me defer. My expert for UI is actually to my left, and let me defer to Executive Director Hoskinson to kind of address that.
So George is right when he talks about the amount of time. It's 10 to 12 days to respond electronically or by mail going with that. Employers have the right to be able to do electronic through our side system and or to participate through returning U.S. mail system. We would all agree that, yes, the U.S. Postal Service gives us some heartburn and anxiety in getting that mail back. We also know that, as George also spoke about, and that I appreciate him talking about, is when a company is not timely, that they do have the right to appeal. Remember that our unemployment insurance process is meant to make sure that it's equitable all the way through the process. So from the time an individual files a claim till the time we determine the separation and make sure that it is correct information, and or to give us a determination and then to decide whether or not somebody is going to appeal that determination. It's on both sides of the house. The claimant has the right to appeal that, and so does the business if it's a two-party separation. And then again, once that lower level decision is made, it then can even go to the higher level appeals, which is the commission, made up of myself as a chair and two other business individuals in the community, labor and public member. We review those. I read cases every weekend. So do these members. And then if, again, somebody wants to appeal that decision, they have the right to go into the court system to do so. I will tell you, as a commission, during this time in the pandemic, we've been very conscious of trying to be aware of the mail system and the time going through and not having that as something that holds somebody all the way through to their claim. By that, I mean if somebody missed getting it turned in on time and we do get the response and they give us a reason because of either the mail or another rationale, we've been able to go ahead, as George also mentioned, be a little bit more at ease with that.
For that explanation. Representative Pratt.
They touched on a little bit earlier on the data breach earlier. Do y'all really know? Again, our question is, I still think it's on the state level, not the employer level. Do you know how deep that went, or do you know yet, or where are we with that?
With the data breach that happened in 2020, we believe was very limited in a standpoint of where an individual saw a very limited amount of information. And even when we had the attack, and I'll also ask Betty to address this, back in March and April, when we saw this massive attack on claims, we cannot determine or appear that there was any kind of data breach from data from within. Most of what's available out there on the dark web is there may be a data breach with a credit card company or some other company where there's data, but we cannot determine that there was any kind of data breach from within UI of any magnitude. There may have been, like I said, there was individual circumstances where information on an individual was available where another individual saw that data, but we cannot determine there's been any kind of massive data breach.
So I can go into a little bit, if you would like, to what happened earlier in this spring. So the Secretary is very much right, and so is Kate when she talks about organized activity. That is very real. I testified back in late February, early March, and Kate gave the number earlier, $63 billion. We look in this country to see $105 billion being fraud during this pandemic timeframe. That's what we ultimately look to see happen across this country. That's the number. And so when we started watching and started seeing, as far as in terms of what happened in the late winter, we started seeing chatbot attacks. That's when we took the system down in February and then put up the chatbot, the reCAPTCHA. I was trying to think of the term, I apologize. The reCAPTCHA in order to do the first level of that. We then determined again that we needed to do some more work. And then if you remember, we did take the system down for about 4 or 5 days. That time frame was to go in and really put down the system, put in a new front door interface, change the PIN code system because we had a 4-digit PIN. And to be quite honest with you, people had gotten very lax with using something that was very similar. And that would be taking their last 4 digits of their Social Security number and using their 4-digit PIN. When we stood that back up, we put in some more complex PIN registration process. There are now tokens, just like if you were to go out to your bank and get information, you're going to get an email back to get verification before you can go back in the system. And we made every person go back in and register. We sent that out to everybody that would have had a claim in the past 20 years to go back in and re-register their accounts, because we know that, as the Secretary was saying, information has been being lifted off of the dark web. We also know very easily that I think was mentioned here by one of you all on the task force about individuals copying emails or copying websites. It has not been uncommon across this country for UI websites to be copied and one thing be changed, one area be changed. It is not enough for you to notice that it's not the real thing. Same thing with emails, that they're able to go in and do that. So we are working diligently in keeping with our IT staff to try to see what we see coming through the fraudulent activity. And we will say that the pandemic unemployment insurance, the PUA, is where we saw most of the fraud coming through.
One more question.
Representative Pratt has a follow-up.
I've got this type of personal experience. On 4/21 of last year, we had an employee literally walk off the job site. Never called us, never came back. The reason he didn't come back is a long story, but he may have wound up incarcerated. But on 6/22, we were notified, I have it in front of me, that he was that he had filed for unemployment. I can tell you, I talked to my office manager. We faxed it back immediately. We mailed it back immediately, and he drew unemployment benefits the last 6 months of last year. How can that happen? And do we know whether or not we finally wind up, did we get credited for that again? We never got any follow-up on that. And I know that when we got it again, I know she followed it twice. And let me tell you, she was absolutely jumping up and down in her seat. How can this person do this? Walked off the job site, didn't even bother calling us or show back up to work, but he drew unemployment benefits. How do we know what happened with that?
Well, sir, what I will tell you is I would need to look at that individual case to know exactly the particulars of that. I can't speak to the generalities of that term. And again, remember, we were in the part of the pandemic, and there was different criteria for how one could be separated from a job. And just like Senator Alvarado mentioned, how many people would George need to be able to fulfill those 400 insurance claims? We too are in the same situation. We too need that and more to be able to handle what we have coming into us. So I don't want to get into generalities. I'm happy to look at your claim particularly and to see exactly what did the person put in, and let us look at it from that point.
I'll be glad to give you a copy before you get out here today,
All right,
sir.
will do. Thank you.
Representative Pratt, I think it's very possible, just because of the staff, the overwhelming numbers, that things like that could have slipped through. There's no doubt about that. And those are the kind of things where we continue trying to hire more staff and trying to address so that we are responding quicker to employers when they have appealed. And obviously, at some point, I don't know where that's got lost in the shuffle, and you're right, provide that to Buddy, and he'll follow up on that.
Well, I know she's tried to follow up several times to no avail.
Okay.
Senator Alvarado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for the comments about the employees. How many employees could you have used during this time to help you process these claims?
Just for what we have in adjudication, we could probably use a good 100 people in that alone.
Can you answer me why then, when our House and Senate leadership approached the administration, offered all of our secretarial staff for LRC, roughly 80 to 100 employees, to assist with this process, we were told we don't need them, we don't want the help, thank you, but we don't need them? Is there a reason why you didn't welcome the help of the legislature during that time? Because 80 to 100 employees, admittedly, we have staff that get these calls every day. We get emails every day. Ms. Eves gets communications from us every day saying, please help all of our constituents. Our staff are becoming experts in unemployment insurance, and our secretaries are handling this issue every day. We offered them to the cabinet, to the administration, saying we'll be happy to provide you the assistance to get you more state employees who are already vetted ahead of time, are prepared to help you do that. We were rejected. Is there a reason why we were rejected to provide that help for people and for your cabinet?
Sir, I don't have that knowledge as far as that goes. I know what I do every day with my staff, to be quite honest with you. And as we hire more people on it, while your staff has become very much an expert, and I agree, I believe they have, because they see the same things, and we know because we both work to get that information. Someone coming in to do adjudication or fact-finding for what is known doesn't come in off the street. I mean, they go off of levels of training to go with that. But I can't answer that. I stepped back into this role on August 3rd.
Senator, I think I can answer that.
Sure.
Sort of in short order, due to UI really being a federal program, due to legal and privacy constraints, those employees would have had to been detailed to the labor cabinet, and that's not something that was really agreed upon at that time.
Okay, Mr. Chairman. I mean, I think that could have been done when this thing started, which was way, 15 months ago, 16 months ago, when this all kind of hit the fan. There was an opportunity. It would have taken 30, 60 days, whatever, 90 days. You would have had those employees working for a full year helping you out with this because they're still handling a lot of these very issues. And I find that frustrating. If you don't have an answer, I suggest you call your boss and ask him, why was that help not taken from the legislature, willing to put everything aside? We want to help people out, get these payments to help adjudicate these things quicker, to be able to detect fraud quicker. I think it would have helped tremendously. But it's frustrating for me when that was offered and it was rejected summarily. The second question I've got, Mr. Chairman, if you'll indulge me, I know you're talking about how a lot of our employers are not having to require to pay. I got a call from a constituent yesterday on the phone saying, I need to talk to you, an employer who had an employee who had a fraudulent claim under his name. Got a hold of someone here in state government up in the cabinet. They agreed it's probably a fraudulent claim. We're going ahead and processing and getting it taken care of. The employer got a letter, I think it was this week, because he called me up and said, I'm concerned about this. He was told, basically, look, there was fraud on this. You'll need to pay this back to the state. That's what you're going to have to do to cover this fraud that was issued because you got paid fraudulently. You need to pay us back for that. He's saying, I didn't submit the claim. It was someone else who did it fraudulently. Yeah, we know that. So you're saying the employer has to submit payment for the fraud that someone else committed. Yes, was what he was told. And I can give you the name of the individual. I'll be happy to provide it for you. But he's got a letter.
That should have been the answer.
Yeah, but we're getting those calls. Even got it this week. I got a call yesterday about it, and he said that was confirmed. Yeah, you need to pay it back. Am I going to get this money back when you find out who did it fraudulently? Probably not. It's going to go into some kind of a separate fund. So that's what we're getting these calls currently right now. And I got it from somebody yesterday. I'll be happy to give you the information. Sure. That'd be great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Sharp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Roberts, I understand that there was a outside contract that was awarded during the unemployment process, to process unemployment claims?
Yes, sir.
Okay. How did that process come about to determine who was awarded that contract?
Are you speaking about the Ernst & Young contract?
Were there more than just Ernst & Young?
Ernst & Young is the only company that we've utilized with a contract to assist us with UI. They were already a contractor that is doing work, an organization that's done work and approved by Commonwealth of Kentucky. And they had experience assisting with other states, and we contracted with them.
Were there any other contractors out there that also had experience that could have done that?
Very possibly, there could have been.
Okay, so they were just selected. It was
from a standpoint of looking at the urgency of being able to have a contractor that already had experience, that already had approval, that was under contract with the Commonwealth. It was a matter of a decision was made that we thought it was expedient, that would accomplish what we needed, and that's why they were selected. They're a very recognized company across the country, a very professional company with a lot of history, and that was the reason.
And who made that decision, sir?
That was a decision that was made through our administration, through my cabinet, and with the governor's office.
Okay. And how much was that contract for?
There was actually two contracts. We did one contract in July, and that was extended. And then there was a second contract in December or late.
Second contract would have been in early October.
About a total of almost $14.5 million.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Nemes, do you have any questions?
Yes. Secretary Roberts, first of all, we hate to see you go, and I hope that the future holds well for you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
With the when I was at the Labor Cabinet, the workers' comp was all done by mail. So we put in place a computer system that is now up to date, where the judges and the attorneys can do things online. We went over to the Education Workforce Cabinet, where unemployment insurance was at that time. We were implementing another system like that so that people wouldn't have to do everything by mail or go into the only option was going to unemployment offices. I know that COVID hit and you were overwhelmed. Is that system being applied now?
Well, the process for that, there was an RFP that was actually being worked on during the tail end at the end of the Bevan administration. And that was posted and put out, I guess, about February or March of 2020. And if you recall, and you go back, I think it was either in 2017 or 2018 where the General Assembly actually applied a surcharge that whenever the trust fund got to a certain level, there was money to go into the SCUF fund. And the SCUF fund would be used to fund for that RFP for the replacement of that system. I think it was estimated at the time of that legislation it would cost somewhere around $60 million to replace the system. We have a little bit in excess of $30 million that's in that fund. The General Assembly also appropriated this past session about $10 million, so we have about a little over $40 million available. That RFP, we've been in the process of working with vendors and I'm at a point where the process with an RFP is confidential, but we're in the process of that RFP in the latter stages of that RFP of trying to select a vendor for that. So that's where we stand on reworking and rebuilding the UI system.
So we're moving forward with that.
Yes, sir, we are.
Okay, the next thing is, let's clarify a little about Ernst & Young. When they first came on board, they were doing pretty much what the LRC was doing. It was just getting and obtaining preliminary information because they did not have federal approval to go into detail at the higher level. But after a while, it was finally asked of the feds, which I think it should have been sooner, to obtain that approval, and they did. Are they still working with us with the federal approval or not working with us?
We are not using Ernst & Young since they completed that contract and turned over information in January. So we have not used Ernst & Young since that time.
Okay, so we don't have anyone besides the normal employees with that federal
One of the
approval.
things, as you do additional work, the way the federal government operates from the standpoint of funding is additional funds become available almost on a quarterly basis as they look at what your workload is. And the standpoint is we increase work and performance, then additional dollars have become available. And as those dollars have become available, we've been looking to try to hire our own employees. And so we've been trying to gear up. And you can only do what the federal government provides for you, that additional funds.
Yes, but what in addition to that, what I'm talking about is there's certain employees, not any employee that you hire in unemployment can have access to the federal
Correct.
information.
That is correct.
And that's
That is
where we
correct.
passed the bill recently so that you can put more people on that would be approved.
That bill was to require that employees of the Labor Cabinet had to have that background check.
Correct.
To be able to be
Where
secured.
are we on that? Still struggling with hiring?
We are having trouble like other businesses to get folks in, yes. And also you will note that at the same time that Senator Alvarado was talking about staffing going up, we were also waiting on that federal guidance to give us flexibility in staffing as well. And we've got that flexibility in staffing that only goes through September of this Labor Day weekend.
Thank you.
I have, well, I'll add to that. Do we have any folks that have not asked a question? So we've got a couple of follow-ups. We're gonna go. Representative Sharp has a follow-up question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's been reported that the previous Beshear administration was offered federal money to update the unemployment insurance computer systems, and that was turned down. Do we know why that was?
I can speak to that, I believe. The standpoint is we go back to the task force and the activity when we dealt with this issue with unemployment insurance. And I served on that task force as a labor representative at that time. And as we were looking to making changes, and if you recall, there was modifications reducing benefits, some benefits, and increasing taxes on employers. And the group and the task force that made those recommendations felt like that there was equal give on both sides, whether employers are going to be paying a little more. We implemented the 1-week waiting period, reduced certain benefits. And at the time, the General Assembly initially did not accept those particular changes. If you go back and look, we had to have a special session to be able to pass that legislation. The money that was provided as an offering, to be able to upgrade the system, was based on liberalizing and making benefits available to more workers, part-time workers. there was not an appetite with the General Assembly, in our opinion, to be able, we were having trouble enough to pass the legislation that accomplished what we were recommending, that we did not appear to be an appetite to expand coverage to give part-time workers benefits. And that's why that was a decision really that tied in with the General Assembly more so than just the administration as to whether or not we want to go that direction, because we didn't think there was support for it.
Okay, I'm hearing you say you feel there wasn't an appetite. Was the General Assembly approached, and was this discussed with them?
At this point, to say who was part of that discussion, you got to remember on the task force, we had several legislators on the task force. There was at least 2 members from the House and 2 members from the Senate. There may have even been 3. We had the House the Speaker Pro Tem was on that committee. Senator Gibbons served on that committee. So obviously that task force was not just individuals from the private sector, from business community and from the labor community. We had legislators on there that was very much part of that decision-making process. Now, I can't say, was that conversation with the Senate President? I really don't know. I can't speak to that. But I know that the legislators that were part of that process did not believe that we could have success moving forward and expanding benefits in order to take advantage of those additional dollars.
Thank you, sir.
Senator Alvarado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just, I guess, from this point going forward, these task forces are always assigned to find solutions for this. So I guess I'm going to ask you, as members of the leaders of the cabinet, really, your wish list of what you would like to see happen coming up to make this either not happen again in the future or make things easier. We obviously increased staffing is one issue. More modernizing equipment. Are there other things that you think we should be doing or that you're going to ask from the legislature to get accomplished?
Obviously, if we can modernize our system, that's going to make a big difference. And we're continuing every day to kind of look to see are there things that we can do even before this RFP is awarded, and because it may take 2 to 3 years to make that be an outcome. Looking to having cross-training where we have staff that's maybe even more cross-trained that can fill in and do other things where maybe in the past they haven't quite done that. There needs to be right now, for example, we're mandated because we are totally funded with federal dollars. All staff are what they're considered to be federally funded, time limited. It's very difficult to get people to stay there very long. And if you're an 18A employee right now, you'll press up a promotion because you have to leave your 18A position in order to consider a promotion. So there are those type of restrictions makes it difficult to promote and to be able to encourage people to come and stay within the system. And I'm not sure when that law changed that required that, but if there was some general fund dollars appropriated to help supplement the federal dollars, you'd be able to have some 18A for longevity and continuity. And I think that that's something the General Assembly ought to consider, because I know it's very difficult when you're looking at trying to promote someone. And if I'm a career employee and I'm an 18A employee, why would I take the risk of stepping over for a small promotion if I've got to leave that? And so that's another area.
Representative Pratt, this will be the last question, and then I have a request to the cabinet.
I'd like you all address, I realize you all are having out regional offices now, correct?
Yes, sir.
Well, I was just heard in a news conference that the administration is now saying unemployment's down to 4.7%. If it's down to 4.7%, why are we expanding UI and the people in it?
We still have a backlog of claims from 2020 and from the standpoint of trying to adjudicate a lot of the issues, just like what you're talking about, addressing issues where maybe even an employer has protested. As a standpoint, there's still a backlog. And even though that unemployment rate is down and it's improving, there's still a backlog that needs to be worked. And until we get all those cases worked, there's going to still be that need to provide that particular service.
Once all those are adjudicated, do you plan on keeping all those offices open from forever?
Well, career centers have always been open, and we provide services broader than just unemployment. The majority of the services you think about on a normal situation where someone comes in as unemployed is not only we look at trying to help you with your benefits, but we're also trying to find out how can we help you find a job. What can we do to improve, whether it's an education issue or whether or not you need to help you with your resume writing, interview skills. So a lot of the services provided, you will be continuing those on and on. Now, what will happen as our backlog dissipates and is resolved, then that staff, as those funds disappear, those federally funded positions will disappear too. But you still want to have staff within those career centers that can assist with UI. That did not exist prior to us reopening the career centers. There was no one in the local center that had that ability to do that. And that will continue on a limited basis.
So you will be reducing staff once all the claims are?
Oh, yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Chairman Weber, there is one thing I wanted to share, just a point. I didn't get a chance, and I know you'll address this one down the road too, but your trust fund, currently we have a $505 million deficit, $575 million that has been appropriated by the General Assembly out of the federal funds. Those funds will become available in the new fiscal year, and that $505 million debt will be paid off sometime within the next couple of weeks. We currently have a positive balance in the trust fund of $345 million. That's due to employers paying in their first quarter their taxes, and also some of the dollars, the CARES Act dollars that Governor Beshear has appropriated to the trust fund. But the trust fund is pretty solid shape right now, especially when we pay off the $505 million debt.
Okay. Thank you for that information. I appreciate you coming here today and the presentation that you had, responding to the questions, and then the presentation that we had from Mr. McFarland and Kate from the chamber. One of the things that I would like to have as chairman of this task force or co-chairman of this task force make a request to your cabinet is this. A few days ago, I had a chance to meet with Legislative Director Eves. We had a good discussion. One of the things we talked about was updating the technology, the SCUF fund, the appropriations from the General Assembly, and the need to have a very archaic system updated. I believe it dates back to 1979, and you're having to try to locate retired state employees with experience to come in to try to make upgrades and give advice on the system, those folks that help program. So as I was listening to the discussion earlier, especially from Mr. McFarland, one of the things that I thought about, and I'm going to make this request to you. I know Secretary Roberts, you will be leaving in the next couple of weeks. Secretary Link will be coming in. I'm assuming you folks will be staying on. I would like to request that you work with the Kentucky Chamber. We have another entity here today, the National Federation of Independent Businesses. Work with those folks while we're in the process of developing this new system to get their input and their feedback on things that can be added to the system to help with improvements, help make information available to business entities so that they may not actually have to speak to a live person. They can actually get that information online. It's readily available. Get their feedback on what's required of them when they file, when they have the filings and on unemployment claims and those types of things. But I'm going to ask you to work with them on that. I will follow this because I think it's important. I think one of the reasons that we are here today with this task force is I don't want to see us repeat the last year again with a system that was overwhelmed. And folks, I'm still, yesterday I had a request from a constituent who's still waiting for money from October of last year. And we've submitted that information to you. But I would like for you to work with them to get input on how to make that system better and how to make that system more efficient and more workable so that we get it right the first time as we move forward.
Obviously, I can't really speak for Secretary Link, but I do believe that he will be very agreeable to do that. I will pass that along.
I intend to ask him so. I want to thank you all for appearing before the task force and answering questions and presenting today. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Our next presenter we have on the agenda, and I think she's out of my line of vision as well. Amy Stade, if you will come forward. I asked Amy to come here because as executive director of the Kentucky Association of Private Providers, she works with a nonprofit organization that's very important to our communities. Very important. You all can stay here, media, if you'd like. I think this is important.
I think I
Amy,
scared them away.
Amy, if you will introduce yourself for the record and then begin with your comments.
Hi, my name is Amy Stade. I am the executive director of the Kentucky Association of Private Providers. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here. I will admit that I am not an unemployment insurance expert, but these issues affect my members tremendously, and I thank you for the opportunity to be here to talk about it. CAP is a trade association representing over 100 providers of community-based support services to individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. CAP has both for-profit and not-for-profit members. CAP members provide services to individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities through our Medicaid waiver programs. Generally, individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities receive these services through the Supports for Community Living and the Michelle P. waiver programs, but some get them through the home and community-based waivers, and that's just a little background knowledge for you. These services allow individuals with significant intellectual and developmental disabilities to continue to live in the community, and it includes 24-hour care. So we're not talking about institutional settings, and it's a cost savings for the Commonwealth. These are all privately owned businesses. These are not state-run businesses. These are individual business owners in all of your districts. Generally, when we think of unemployment insurance, businesses don't get much sympathy. Many look at large corporations that have profits in the millions or even billions and assume that these companies can afford it if their unemployment insurance costs increase, because they can just increase prices to keep up. We all hear stories of companies that don't contest unemployment claims because it costs them more to contest the claim than to just pay it. I'm here to tell you about small business owners in Kentucky who cannot increase prices to keep up with these costs. CAP members are 100% Medicaid reimbursed by the Kentucky Medicaid program. They don't bill private insurance. They have no other source of income other than the Kentucky Medicaid program. Because they're 100% Medicaid reimbursed, they operate on tight budgets, as we can expect, and any unexpected increase in the cost of doing business could be fatal. CAP members cannot increase the price of the hamburger to offset significant increases in their cost of doing business because their customer is the Kentucky Medicaid program. Additionally, CAP members are unable to substantially raise wages without a reimbursement increase from the Medicaid program. The margins are just tight. Just for some background, many of our members operate what are called adult day programs. They were ordered to be closed in March of 2020 by the governor in line with COVID orders. They were not allowed to reopen until June 2020. And since that time, there have been that remain in place today. There are social distancing requirements that basically amount to capacity limits. We still have social distancing requirements in these settings, and so they're still not able to operate at full capacity. My members have done everything they should have done to stay in business. They've gotten PPP loans. They've tried not to lay off staff. But there was a significant period of time where they were ordered to be closed, had to lay off staff, and then it was, several months. Some of them didn't get first round PPP loans. So there were several months there where staff were laid off before they could call them back after they got those PPP loans. And again, that's just a little background for you all. For our nonprofit members, we've got several nonprofit reimbursing employers, many of which operate those adult day programs that I just described. These nonprofit members have been incredibly grateful for the federal funds that have been directed to help assist these reimbursing employers. Without this assistance, they would have gone out of business. So we are incredibly, incredibly thankful for that assistance. For our contributing employers, we've got a number of for-profit contributing employers. We would just ask that the Commonwealth continue to control unemployment insurance costs just in any way possible. We appreciate your action during the 2021 session. It's been tremendously helpful. And just in the future, if you can keep businesses like ours in mind, that would be great. Workforce. You've all heard a lot about workforce issues. And our waiver providers, CAP members, are suffering right now. We've reached the point where our providers cannot recruit enough staff to cover shifts, leading to massive increase in overtime costs. And it's important to remember that CAP members, we can't reduce operating hours. We can't close down for the day. We can't just limit our hours 9 to 5. This is 24-hour care. So we don't have an option. We have to staff every shift. And a lot of times we have direct support professionals working 60, 80 hours a week, which is exhausting. It's hard care. Waiver providers, CAP members, we cannot offer competitive wages. Last week, the Kentucky Chamber presented information in committee indicating that the additional $300 on top in unemployment insurance on top of what a worker usually receives amounts to about $15.75 an hour. The reimbursement rate that CAP members receive from the Kentucky Medicaid only supports $10 an hour. So many providers have to actually offer lower than $10 an hour just because of the increased unemployment costs. It's impossible for waiver providers to compete with the additional $300 benefit. We're competing with the government, and the government sets our rates. So we're in a bit of a pickle right now. Additionally, CAP members have reported that when we have interviewed job applicants and offered a position, these members were told that the individual being interviewed would call them back when their unemployment insurance ran out. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the issues that CAP members have faced in recent years, not just during the pandemic. This is not to place any blame, but to shed some light on what's happening in our unemployment system. Outside of the pandemic, to qualify for unemployment benefits, an employee must be unemployed through no fault of their own. In our experience, the standard is not enforced. Just a story to sort of illustrate what I'm talking about. Pre-pandemic, so not during the pandemic, a residential provider, so someone who provides 24-hour care, received a credible allegation of abuse, meaning that there was a credible allegation that a staff member abused an individual with a disability. That residential provider took all steps necessary, reported it to all the state agencies, immediately placed this person on leave per their policy, did all of the right things. The residential provider did an internal investigation. Adult Protective Services also did an investigation. Both determined that the abuse occurred, and the caregiver employee admitted that he or she abused the individual with the disability. Per Kentucky regulation, when there is a substantiated allegation of abuse or neglect or things like a failed drug test, there are several reasons. 1915C waiver provider is required by regulation to fire that employee. That provider did that. That employee turned around, applied for unemployment, and received it. And that's not a one-off. That happens a lot. We've got a lot of situations where waiver providers fire an employee due to an allegation of abuse or neglect, doing the right thing, trying to protect a vulnerable adult, and then are penalized in the form of increased unemployment costs because that employee turns around and is granted unemployment. It is impossible for employers in this state to prevail in some of these unemployment determinations. In our opinion, shoring up this standard would really save the state a lot of money. Other issues, and a lot of these have already been addressed. Employees are granted unemployment despite being employed somewhere else full-time. Employers report that they don't receive the notice of the unemployment claim in time to respond. When employers have tried to report fraud, they don't get a response. We've heard stories where benefits are being paid and the employers have not had the opportunity to appeal. Just a number of stories like this, like you've heard from everyone else. But I really just wanted to bring to your attention, and this is unique to my members and other caregiving industries, when employers are firing someone because there is a credible allegation of abuse and neglect, or because they're required by regulation to fire them, we shouldn't be penalizing them. And that's all I've got. So if you have any questions, please feel free.
Senator Alvarado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look around at the members of the committee. I think nobody here is on health and welfare, so this warms my heart because I have providers who are involved in this space. And first of all, thank you guys for what you do. I mean, I know how tough it is. I work with a lot of individuals in a very similar field in long-term care and skilled nursing facilities, and I know the difficulties everybody's experienced during this time. A lot of loss of lives, and we know that it's difficult to provide care to our Medicaid population because of reimbursements. I remind people, I don't think a lot of folks who are in healthcare understand how tight the margins are in this state for lots of reasons. As a provider, we were very tight when I provided services to people with Medicaid. I think I made $2 a visit, 4 visits an hour, which is pretty quick. It was about $8 an hour, and I actually had that kind of a profit. Most medical practices lose money, and I think it's gotten worse as Medicaid reimbursements have dropped over time and costs of doing business have gone up. So I appreciate that. Again, we're asking, you kind of mentioned showing up some of the regulations and things around this in terms of if people have been fired for allegations of abuse or for other issues. We're always going to welcome other ideas that you have in terms of what we could do better in the future, what we can learn from our mistakes moving forward also. Are there other factors? I mean, I know AMA has come out with a position saying that our liability costs, the issue you just described as a liability issue for a lot of facilities, and sometimes liability will come from that as well. A 30% increase in liability insurance costs for medical providers in this state this upcoming year, which is the highest increase by far of anywhere in the country. And I'm wondering if you've had any issues in terms of increased costs with that during this time, as far as coming through as a medical provider, again, with all the risk there. I'm wondering if you could comment about that.
Sure. So our OTs, PTs, speech therapists, individuals like that, more professional, yes, obviously there is a liability insurance, and we're kind of waiting to see what happens with that. As for our residential providers, because they're community-based settings, that falls under a business's general liability. We haven't seen any increases yet, but that doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. We're still kind of waiting to hold out. But with those residential providers, there's not a professional liability insurance associated. It's more general business. But again, we're hoping that it doesn't happen, but it may. And again, any increase, you understand perfectly that any unexpected increase in the cost of doing business can sink a Medicaid provider. So that's why we're really advocating hard to just control these costs as we can.
How many of your providers would you estimate are at risk of closing this upcoming year? Percentage-wise?
I've probably got, there's about 200 providers statewide. About half of those are members of our association. In our association, we've probably got about 25 that provide those day services only that I kind of described earlier, and all of those are struggling, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Alvarado. Any other questions from members of the committee? Amy, thank you for sharing that. I'm glad you highlighted the concern and the issue regarding abuse and neglect. That is something that I will be looking at. This committee itself may take a closer look at as we proceed during the discussions on reforming unemployment insurance reform. But I appreciate the information. And you and I had a discussion back during the session when I was working on House Bill 413. And one of the things that came out of that discussion that I think is important for the members of this committee to realize is that if we have your facilities closing across the state, these folks will have to be cared for in some capacity or another. And so you actually provide a very much needed service that will be sorely missed in this state. And so I think it's important that we be mindful of that. It's one of the reasons why I was interested in having you again appear today. So thank you for your presentation. And no one has any comments? That concludes that section.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we now move to item number 4 on the agenda. If Tom Underwood will come forward. He has a guest in person and then one remotely. If you all will introduce yourself for the record, and then after you've done that, you can begin with your presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the task force. We appreciate the opportunity to be here to talk about what's happening to small business out there. My name is Tom Underwood. I'm the State Director for the National Federation of Independent Business. We represent around 4,000 small businesses across the state and are the largest advocacy organization in the nation dedicated just to small business. Our typical members have fewer than 50 employees, many of them only 3 to 5 employees, a big portion. So they are the true mom and pop Main Street businesses. I have 2 gentlemen with me here today, and I'll introduce them quickly and then let them introduce themselves fully and explain why they're here and what's going on. I have Mr. Eddie Kraft with Nansen Craft Florists in Louisville, and on Zoom I have Mr. Dan Withrow of CSS Distribution Group, also of Louisville. We recently did a survey among our members about the current labor shortage and what was going on out there. Right now, our most recent survey says that 90% of our members have open positions across the state. 100% of those are having difficulty finding applicants. 86% of them cannot find applicants even at wages that are equal or greater to the benefits that are being received now. It was gratifying to hear from the cabinet and from the previous testimony about the process that's involved both in filing claims and in contesting claims. Unfortunately, not all small businesses have the benefit of having someone like Mr. McFarland that's able to help them with this process. In fact, very few small businesses have any sort of dedicated HR function in their businesses. So when we talk about setting up a website that has more information for small businesses to help, we would applaud that greatly, but we would also caution that perhaps some of these career centers across the state could also have someone in there that could counsel a small business that could come in and talk one-on-one about their rights and the procedures that are involved in that. I've talked to small businesses across the state about fraud. Fraud is widespread and rampant. I will give you an anecdote on that. My wife has a small company that manages not-for-profit trade and professional associations. She received an unemployment claim on an individual for a nonprofit organization that has 40 members, was formed in 1981, and has never had an employee the entire time that it's been in existence, and still received an unemployment claim. So there is certainly information out on the web that's being used. When we went in and tried to file online about that fraud to have it looked into, none of the questions on the website fit the situation for the employer. And that was a real problem. At that time, I marked up the piece of paper in red and mailed it to a unnamed secretary or commissioner and asked them to take a look into it. Have yet to hear anything back on that as well. It is gratifying that the members of the General Assembly have been working so hard, and I know you're exhausted from the unemployment claims, from the claims from employers. Unfortunately, you also have hundreds of other constituents that don't know to call you, and that is a real problem out there. I've recently talked to an employer that has been offering $25 to anyone that will come in and fill out an application for a job that pays $17 an hour. He has had 0 takers. I talked to a convenience store owner Their family owns 2 convenience stores. They are so short on employees that they are now working 60 and 70 hours a week themselves trying to keep the stores open, but they are running out of rope. At this time, I know of no restaurants that are fully staffed anywhere in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Many are having to cut their hours, even keeping their capacities at the pandemic restriction levels, just because they simply cannot serve the customers that would come in. The only business we've been able to identify that is fully staffed is the telecenters that are calling and asking you to talk about your auto warranty system. So we're late in the day and I don't want to take too much time. I would like to ask Mr. Eddie Kraft to tell us a little bit about his business and about his experiences, and then we'll go to Mr. Withrow, who's on Zoom. Thank you.
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. My name's Eddie Kraft.
Can you turn your microphone on, Mr. Kraft?
Right there. There you go.
There you go. Eddie Kraft. I am from Louisville, Kentucky. I own a florist with my brother. We were founded in 1850, and I am 6th generation. And this year, like you guys know, has been crazy. Before the pandemic, we had 100 employees. Now we have about 75, and I have positions for about 20 employees across the board, from drivers to CSRs, designers. And as Amy said earlier, it's hard to compete with the government. We pay a competitive wage. We have benefits. We have a profit sharing plan. But it's amazing how hard it is to find people to hire. And kind of along those lines is over the last 3 months, I counted it up. I've had 100 applications, and we've asked all 100 of them to come in for an interview, and only 20 of them, 2 in 10 have showed up even for an interview. And of those 20, we've hired about 10 of those. So, just in a nutshell, it confuses me and a lot of my friends who are looking for employees on why we're still paying these benefits, federal benefits, when, as everybody knows, even the unemployment office is looking for people. Why we keep paying these benefits when there's so many jobs out there. That's my story in a nutshell.
Dan Withrow, would you like to chime in now, please? And unmute.
Are you there, Mr. Withrow?
Yes, sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
You may proceed.
All right. Thank you to the committee for having me today. I'm Dan Withrow with CSS Distribution Group. I started my company 16 years ago. We are a national distributor of pallets and packaging. We also manufacture pallets in a 50,000 square foot warehouse off Bishop Lane. So I've got quite a story about hiring. When we started the warehouse in December of 2019, we only needed a few employees. But over the pandemic, we've been very, very fortunate. We've not been like a restaurant that had to shut down. We've landed a couple of large contracts and had to go from 2 employees to 10 employees in a warehouse. And trying to find employees has been extremely difficult. We have gone to 2 different staffing companies. We've posted on Indeed. We've posted with a company called Jobble. If you don't know Jobble, they're like the Uber of warehouse employees, where employees can sign up online. They literally had supposedly hundreds of thousands of employees signed up with Jobble. And of the 10 employees that said that they would come to work for us, not one of them showed up. And we've posted signs out in front of our building. We've gone to family and friends and posted on Nextdoor. We've posted on Facebook. And we only have 2 full-time employees, and we filled the rest with part-time employees. We pay $14 to $17 an hour in the warehouse. And I finally figured out a way to at least staff the warehouse with college kids out of the University of Louisville. But the problem is they'll work for 3 months and then they're finished with their semester, they'll go home, or like in the summer, they'll work in the summer, then they start school, and it makes it difficult to have continuity in the warehouse. So I've also talked to literally dozens of my suppliers to find out what's going on with their issue. And I'm part of a letter that I submitted as part of my testimony with the forest products industry here in the state of Kentucky, and 48 other companies all signed on to that letter. They're all struggling to find labor. And most of the labor that fill the jobs in the forest products industry are the types of labor that are currently getting the extra unemployment. This is labor that's going to be $15 to $20 per hour labor. So someone that could choose to stay home and get the extra $300 per week federal money or go to work, I don't blame the laborers. I mean, they can get to stay home and make $35,000, $38,000 a year, or go to work. They're going to choose to stay home. We've got to eliminate that extra carrot out there so that they can then go back into the labor force. All of these companies that signed on to this letter, they're all very much struggling to get lumber cut, lumber processed through the supply chain. And that's one of the reasons why the cost of lumber has gone through the roof, because they either have to pay extra, they've got to pay overtime, or it cuts the supply chain down. There's a limited amount of supply of lumber, which makes the price of lumber to go up very high. So without a doubt, what's happening right now is, without having labor out there to fill the jobs, it's greatly impacting our industry. It's greatly impacting the cost of the products that are out there. So I'd ask the task force to please take a look at that and see what we can do to stop the extra carrot that's out there right now, so we can fill the jobs that are out there all day long.
Mr. Chairman, if I could conclude before we do questions.
Absolutely.
The asks that we have.
Is your microphone on?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay.
I'm just not very loud. Okay. The asks that we have are as follows. First off, of course, the pandemic has laid bare across state government how archaic the IT systems are. For whatever reason, we're still looking for people that can program Fortran, and I'm probably one of the few people in the room that knows what Fortran is at this point. We would like to see some ARPA funds be allocated in the next session of the General Assembly, specifically for bringing those systems up into the 21st century. That is one-time money from the federal government for infrastructure, and we think that is desperately needed, as demonstrated during the pandemic. The next thing, we would like to see some sort of change in the reporting by individuals applying for work, where the employer can also report whether that individual declined to show up for an interview. We believe that is data that needs to be gathered, as well as going out and filling out applications. We believe that it is time, as has been said, we need to join the other states that have stopped accepting the $300 federal incentive program. The jobs are out there. Of course, there are people that need help. We need to keep the programs in place to help those, but we have got to get people back into the workforce. The inflation we're seeing and the supply chain difficulties, if we don't get people back to work across the country, when American Airlines even announced they're canceling hundreds of flights regularly because they can't get enough people to work on their ramps, we are not going to get back to where we were prior to the pandemic. And the last thing to reiterate is we would like to see if the Labor Cabinet is going to keep these labor centers staffed across the state, that it not only be focused on labor, but also on employers, particularly small employers, to provide them with assistance in navigating the system. I'd be glad to answer any questions, as would my guests, I feel certain.
Thank you. Thank you all for your presentation and for those recommendations. That is the purpose of this task force, to gather recommendations from folks, and we appreciate you mentioning those to us today. First question we do have for you is from Representative Pratt.
Is your wife a member of NFIB?
My wife is a proud member of NFIB, sir.
Actually, I'm also a member of NFIB. You know, as you talk about, you said 90% of your business are looking for employees. I would say it's a little bit higher than that, all said and done, because I mean, literally everyone I talk to, I have yet to find anyone say we're fully staffed and have all the employees we need. And I talk to businesses every day. So again, I would say it's even higher than 9%. But thank you guys for your testimony, and I think that it's something, if we don't get a handle on, it's going to absolutely devastate small businesses.
Thank you. Thanks. And we're proud of your membership too.
Any other comments, questions from any other committee members? I would like to point out, and I think you probably already are aware of this, but Representative Pratt and I did submit a letter to the governor as chairs of the Economic Development, Workforce Investment, and Small Business and Information Technology Committees. I believe I got that correct. Asking the governor to suspend Kentucky's participation in the $300 pandemic assistance unemployment. We all hear from business owners in our districts and across the state that they're having trouble finding employees right now. In my area, a busy restaurant that on any given day of the week, especially a Monday, will be packed at the lunch hour, cannot open on a Monday because they don't have employees to work. They have one individual that will work. And so I agree with you. We have got to get to the point where people are going to have to return to work in this state. And I will share with you my disappointment that the governor's response to that is that no, he will not seek to end our state's participation in that program. Rather, he will now seek to incentivize through bonuses and other means, encouraging people to go back to work in this state. And I think that we've got to move beyond that. We've got to have people have got to return to work. And I think that that unemployment payment is a prime factor in why folks are not seeking to return.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, for the record, the NFIB did submit a letter co-signed by 11 other business organizations to the governor requesting the same thing.
Okay. Are there any other questions from members of this committee or comments before we adjourn? Co-Chair Demas, do you have anything to add?
No, thank you.
Thank you all for being here. Mr. Kraft, thank you for being here. I didn't realize you'd been in business since 1850, but I've seen you around Louisville as long as I can remember, and I've been here over 30 years. And so I want to thank you all for being here. For members of the committee, the next task force meeting will be July 26th, and we will meet at 10 a.m., and Senator Nemes will be co-chairing that meeting. If I have no other questions or comments from members of this committee, we are adjourned.